like it's The Bachelor, and we're just picking one and going with it. And then we realize, like, oh my God, this was a really bad choice. This is not going to last more than a month, but I've signed up for 3 years contractually. Welcome everyone to Return of the Mac. As you can tell, I have a little bit of congestion still. It's been a couple weeks since Right of Boom, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm still feeling the Las Vegas effects clearly. But spring is in the air, things are changing, and I'm really excited about the topic that we're gonna be covering today. Specifically, something that may not seem like a cyber topic, but it absolutely is. And it's something very near and dear to every MSP's heart or any of our partners who are listening's heart, which is essentially the technology stack. So MSPs often struggle with these tech stacks, from pricing to bloated stack to vendor relationships, contractual obligations. There's a lot of questions around technologies and what they need to invest in, and that even doesn't even touch on the surface of where cybersecurity is threaded within that investment as well. So I'm really excited to have our guest today. The Channel program brings together some of these most innovative of technologies, getting them in front of MSPs and helping them curate this tech stack. So I've got, as the CEO of the Channel program, Kevin Lancaster. He knows a thing or two about MSP tech stacks and the questions around them. And we are going to demystify this a little bit today. So I'm happy to welcome Kevin and to delve into the importance of this concept being technology stacks and market trends, where you need to focus your investment. We're going to get a little bit spicy, maybe. Who knows? It's quite early for me, and still a little early for him, I'm sure. So welcome, Kevin. Thank you for joining me on this.
Well, thank you for having me, and I think you summed up a lot of the challenges perfectly, and I can relate to the Vegas funk. I guess it seems like most of these industry events have shifted to either Florida or Vegas. I think
Oh my
there's,
gosh.
I think I'll
Yeah.
be back there 2 or 3 times this year. So, yeah, it's kind of get mentally prepared for
Florida.
the funk that comes with that.
I
So
like that. I'm gonna
yeah,
start calling that the Florida funk because I always
there you
feel
go.
that. I think last time I left Orlando was IT Nation, and I definitely
Mm.
had a bit of a funk from there. And Vegas is its own petri dish. So as much as I enjoy the events, this always happens.
Yeah.
But it's okay. It's gonna give us a nice little angle to the recording today. So I think it'll be helpful. Well, we always kind of start most of these episodes. There's probably a couple where we haven't, but we start most of these episodes with a hot topic. And I wanted to do my best to find something in the news that also aligns with the topic today. And this I found interesting for many different reasons. This is around the NSA, and they around the beginning of March they released their zero trust guidance, coming from Microsoft, seeing all the reference architectures and roadmaps that they do, and of course NIST and CISA. We see a lot of guidance out there, but this is probably the first time I've seen NSA release anything, and this is definitely from a zero trust perspective, a little bit high level. But they are defining it, and to be honest, they had me at zero. They had me at NSA. I feel like they might know a thing or two about zero trust, which, as everyone knows, is kind of the against versus the traditional IT security model where you presume everything and everyone should be trusted. And this is against that, the breach mentality, where you assume breach. And in regards to MSPs, that's kind of something that we want to start changing the culture around, of course, is that assume breach mentality that needs to be happening. So we looked at this zero trust model that they kind of brought to light. And the MSP community specifically, the biggest thing when I was looking at this, and we'll show the graphic too for what they cover. They have their 7 pillars of the zero trust architecture, of course: user, device, app and workload, data, network and environment, automation, orchestration, visibility and analytics, right? Everything we would
Mhm.
assume. They do thread in a lot of items around AI and machine learning, which I thought was interesting, not quite the silver bullet there. And it felt a little meh, but we were talking about this the other day where I guess, is it meh? Is this something the MSP community is really ready for? How should they be considering this when it comes to zero trust? And do you really see guidance like this and models like this being useful considering the threat landscape today? We're still dealing with phishing, business email compromise, right? That's kind of the reality of it. And this is looking at a maturity model that's slightly advanced. And where could this maybe align to with the technology stack conversation?
Yeah, great questions. I think your comment on this guide is one. I think to start, I agree with you. It's absolutely fantastic that NSA is putting their foot forward, uh, given the complexity of the threats that they face. But then they have to think about this in terms of their supply chain. So I think part of this is just helping to extend down into their supply chain to some of the less sophisticated contractors. But
Hmm.
you know, in general, right? I think this is a good stab at you know kind of use that concept of playing 2D and 3D chess. For the average practitioner, this might not look like anything new or interesting. These are things that we've been conditioned to think about, and we've been conditioned about thinking the threats in 3D and 4D in some cases, right? But for the average MSP, they're still on that immature to maturing side of the security spectrum, and so it took things, that kind of that first stab of maybe call it a visualization, is 853, right? Where you have,
Yeah.
broadly speaking, you have to identify, you have to detect, protect, and respond, what have you. Those are the actions that you have to take. But then this zero trust guidance, I think what's great about it, again, for the average MSP is that it takes that 2D kind of landscape and puts it in 3D. It gets you to start thinking about it from a user perspective and how you layer in security, and then same thing from a device perspective. And then I did appreciate the fact that they're thinking in terms of visibility and analytics, kind of that seventh pillar, right? And layering
Yeah.
in AI and ML. And so I think that's new, right? That's newer over the last couple of years, and it's great that they included that in the framework. But so I think the visual uh, is oftentimes more important for the average MSP, because it helps them understand it and it helps them to take these complex challenges and break them down and translate it to their customers, and getting them to understand why they need to be thinking about zero trust as a security practice. But
I
yeah,
completely agree. That does make sense, especially on the
yeah,
maturity side.
yeah.
Um, and they talk about, on the user side, monitoring user behavior activity, and then, incorporating the automation for security response through technical policies mixed with AI for automated blocking actions. And then
Mhm.
they mention AI and ML from the analytics and visibility side. So you're completely right. Like, these are things that we need to do now, especially on the AI ML. Do you think this is going to influence then how people invest in their technologies in their overall stack, especially if they see things like AI and ML? That's something that every vendor out there is leveraging or branding themselves with to ensure it. But what, I mean, that could be a probably, I digress, that could be a longer conversation. But do you think that this is going to influence them to purchase certain technologies over others because they mention little things like behavior analytics and machine learning and things that feel shiny and fancy?
Yeah, look, again, kind of following that maturity model. I think you're semi-mature to mature. Absolutely, the buzzwords are gonna be impactful. Everybody likes the shiny new object. Marketing loves to take these words and weave them in, whether the fluff is real or not. That's always debatable. But yeah, I think that's just the nature of just technology in general. As things evolve, everyone's got this mentality. They got to keep up with the Joneses. You got to stay out in front. And there's just such intense emphasis on AI and kind of being the new threat vector, that yeah, I think folks are going to lean into it. But it'll still be, again, you kind of go back to these pillars, though. It'll still be interesting to see, the overall adoption, because typically, you go back and you think, you know, you know, items like SOAR and XDR and
Yeah.
MDR. There's still that mentality that it's reserved for, you know organizations that have greater exposure risk, right? So your
Hmm.
regulated organizations, financial, healthcare, what have you. So I think it's a great framework, and it'll be interesting to see how MSPs adopt it. But you'll definitely see kind of that mid to mid-level sophistication up to the to sophisticated, jumping on AI
Right.
and trying to use that as a differentiator for sure.
Yeah, I've definitely seen, especially after Right of Boom and being on the showroom and doing
Mhm.
one-on-one conversations with partners, where I don't know, say probably 50% of the time they're starting to, especially the more mature ones, are starting to incorporate terms like AI when they talk about the service offerings and the technology offerings and the things that they're bringing to their customers. And so I never poke a little bit at it just to see. I'm like, well, what do you actually mean by that? Like, how are you
Mhm.
actually incorporating that? But I could see this being beneficial, especially as, the community in itself is so engaged and they take precedent on frameworks specifically like CIS. I would
Mhm.
like to see something where zero trust isn't something we just throw out when we're doing a presentation or talking about something to the MSP space, but specifically we have concepts of zero trust that we
Mhm.
delineate and explain as it relates to how MSPs do their work, because I would love to see actually a version of this framework that's specific for MSPs in that multi-tenant or multi co-managed service type of model, because this would look a little bit different in my opinion as it relates if it was for an MSP's zero trust model for their downstream clients and customers. um, well, I hope we can break that down in the future. We start talking about this a little bit more. Um, Kevin, let's just start from the beginning, because when I
Mhm.
learned that you graciously accepted to be my sacrificial lamb and come on this podcast, which is great, I want to know about the beginning, right? I've heard a lot about ID Agent. Let's start there about kind of the fruition of ID Agent, the success of it, and then we'll move into the channel program and like what kind of went, how did you start there, what did that roadmap look like, and the path to the channel program, and what the channel program is bringing to the space and the community.
Cool, cool, cool. Lot to unpack, but I'll try to be, pretty concise. But so the origin story of ID Agent was that, kind of goes back to 2015. Um, we were just hired by Office of Personnel Management (OPM) right after the first of the two, I guess, salacious nation state compromises of the U.S. government. Right, so I think it's generally accepted it was China that compromised OPM and got into the HR
Oh, I
records.
remember
And
that.
yeah, so
I worked for the
we
state
were.
during that time, so
Oh, well, there you go. So
it was a fun
yep,
alert where I was like, oh great, okay, and
yeah,
but yes,
fun
that
fun
OPM was a big
times.
one.
I wish I could, maybe one day I'll write a book. I've threatened to write a book about this, the whole experience with OPM and the White House, what have you. But no, so we were brought in to help with the identity restoration remediation post breach. Um,
Hmm.
you know, at that point, when we started to spin up that remediation, I started to look at the government employee. Uh, um, that program covered roughly 4 million individuals. That was current employees and retirees. And we started looking at the data that was already out on tour, right? Yeah. Again, this is nation state, so China's not necessarily going to drop that data out there. Maybe at some point they will, for some reason or another. But you start looking out there to see if there's any other data that might relate to that population that's been impacted. And when we
Hmm.
did, we saw that immediately we had records on roughly 800,000 government employees that were out on tour in some form or fashion, whether it be, various degrees of PII, email addresses,
Yeah.
passwords, social security numbers, what have you. And I think for us, that really brought into focus how much of a risk identity is in general to any organization, whether it's government or even kind of the small, mom and pop shop down the street. So as we came out of that, we started to look at ways to take that data and provide value back to customers. And so we started with enterprise customers. We ran kind of a proactive monitoring service for large states, Oklahoma, large sports leagues, law firms, and really early days of dark web, and thinking about compromising these paradigms. The frustrating, I guess, element of this is that again, it was early days, and your CISOs of your Fortune 500 companies and large government agencies, they were still really defensive about
Yeah.
the fact that data was out there. And so they almost were like, I don't know,
Compared to
it's like
today, too.
you go, well, yeah, I mean, there's still
Night
that
and day.
level. Yeah, there's still some, defensiveness, but I think it's generally accepted that this is, the primary threat vector, right? So, so long story short, we were playing an enterprise, and we work with our enterprise customers, and we show them, the string of data that we were finding. So the command and control server, the language that we're finding it in, obviously the data, but as we looked at kind of broadening our approach to the market, we looked at the MSP space, said, is there something there? Is it too immature of a marketplace? But so we did a couple of MSP events. I think we had an article written on us at the time. It was called MSP Mentor Magazine, and overnight, to much of my surprise, the industry really picked up on it. What we had to do, though, we realized we had to kind of scale back the complexity of what we were showing, and said, like, just focus on the
Mm.
fact that we have your password. Your password's out here in clear text. And so once we started doing that at events, we're saying, you know, you have to understand what dark web monitoring is. You have to understand at that point, again, early days of compromised credentials, business email compromise, what have you. But MSPs, I think, right away understood that if they saw their email address and password, they that helped them really understand the complexity of the threats that they face. But it also really teed up uh, the MSP. It gave them the ability to actually go to their customers now and say, all right, all that stuff I've been telling you about security, and you haven't bought it, right? Here's your
Mhm.
password. It's been found 17 times out on these different forums. This is why you need to start investing in security. So I think that kind of looking back, and the rise of ID agent and kind of the acceleration and why we grew so fast is that we took something that is ridiculously complex, as we mentioned, and we boiled it down to the most basic common denominator. Like, your password is out there, right? And if you're not doing these 7, 8, 10, 14 things, depending on, again, the complexity of the organization, you're going to be hosed. So I think, looking back, I think we're most proud of the fact that we've had such a impact on this industry and their ability to break down this very complicated topic, security. Again, break it down to these really, I guess, most common denominators, least common denominator, to get the greater marketplace to understand that it is a new world, and you have to start with this concept, or these concepts like zero trust, because you have to assume breach because of just the volume of attacks, the volume of data, the volume of just different ways to infiltrate and extract. So that was
You
the
really were
cool.
on the frontier then of security conversations relating to the MSP space too, it sounds like, given when all
We're
of this was going down.
Yeah, we were fortunate, right? It was just around, obviously, OPM was a catalyst, and then the initial LinkedIn breach, and then Heartland. So it was just becoming a thing. And I always say, look, I have a history degree, my by education. So if I can understand this stuff and I can break it down to the most basic descriptors, then there's a shot. And so again, I think that was what's cool about the rise of ID agent and the impact that we had. I mean, we ever went from essentially overnight, 0 to 2,000 MSPs, and I think we got up to roughly 5,000 by the time I had departed. So yeah, it was a great ride.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good ride. And then, you wrapped up ID agent and you moved on to the channel program. What is the channel program? Like, what is this? Because you showed me a little bit, we talked about it a
Mhm.
little bit, but I was amazed just at the first sight of it, and especially as we dug into the data. So I felt a little blessed for that. But tell me about this. Like, what inspired you to go this direction? Because it feels a little different from the rhyme and reason purpose of ID Agent to go from
Mhm.
that to the channel program.
Yeah, well, truth be told, after I'd exited the organization that had acquired ID Agent, I kind of had a couple year cooling period, not to get directly back into security. So I think that was one of the reasons why I didn't jump with both feet back into directly into security. But to answer your point or answer your question, so channel program is essentially it's an amalgamation of my background. So I've been fortunate to be on called four sides of this marketplace. I've scaled a large scaled and exited a large VAR IT services MSP consulting firm uh, called Winvale. I scaled arguably the fastest growing security company in the market. I ran go to market at one of the largest platforms in the marketplace, and I've been vested in technology. So I've had a pretty unique experience over the last 25 years and seeing this marketplace. And when I say by marketplace, the channel from different angles, right? From being the IT services company to the vendor and to the investor. So the idea behind channel program is that there are every day dozens and dozens of emerging technologies that are just absolutely killer technologies. And if you know any, a little bit about this marketplace, you go to some of the bigger trade shows. Those emerging vendors have a really hard time getting attention, getting mind
Hmm.
share and traction because the larger vendors, just kind of basic economics, the larger vendors have the ability to take main stage presentations and get out in front of the
Yeah.
marketplace and kind of control the narrative.
Take
And
Gartner out to lunch.
exactly right. So the thought process, and we launched and said, look, let's start with this concept of pitch where we get seven vendors done. I don't care if they're Microsoft or if they're the upstart down the street. Everybody gets the same 7 minutes. The MSPs can log into the platform anonymously and they can evaluate those presentations by
Oh,
those vendors. Yeah. So again, kind of with this security and privacy in mind, we started with that concept, and that's still core to what we are today. MSPs can come in to the platform, they can start looking at technologies. And what was interesting about the platform over the last 6 months is that we launched really the first visualization tool, stack visualization tool for MSPs. So now they can come in and they can start looking at their stack. And we started with this premise: there are roughly 29 core products that an MSP would use, but what we found over the last 6 7 months is that there's roughly 72 different products that an MSP would use, whether it's to manage their organization or whether it's part of service delivery to their customer, right? So that was pretty interesting. So we took that next step of helping the MSP to visualize their stack, right? And then start to see what the gaps are, or maybe even like the overlap in their stack. No, we'll kind of get to kind of what the stack looks like in some of these tools, but I think that needed to be done because when you talk to MSPs, 98, 99% of MSPs, when it comes to vendor management, they
hmm,
manage their vendors via Excel spreadsheets, and
yeah.
they don't have a visualization, a way to really visualize, effectively their stack. So that was one of the biggest, I think, contributions of this platform so far is that we've had tremendous velocity because MSPs have come in, they've added over 21,000. I think we're close to 22,000 products to the stacks, and so that's giving us a really
Oh my
interesting,
gosh.
yeah, it's giving us a peek into, what the not just the average stack looks like, but the average stack of a smaller MSP, maybe $1 million MSP versus the stack and the complexity of a
Right.
stack of a $50 million MSP. So at the fundamental level, that's what we wanted to do with channel program is help the MSPs make better decisions by visualizing their technology, better, more proactively managing their vendors, and then having access to all these, emerging vendors that are coming out, again, daily. I mean, every week I probably talk to a dozen, dozen and a half interesting new takes on technology. Uh,
That's
and so
exhausting.
it's exhausting, and I'll say that I think one of the benefits on the other side of this platform for the vendors, right? And this kind of gets into just how fragmented and how complex and just how murky this marketplace can be. But that's probably one of the benefits of working with so many vendors is that you can cut through the noise pretty damn quick. Again, going back
Right.
to when MSPs come in and they watch these vendor presentations, I typically sit down with them. I say, "Don't tell me about the color of the buttons. Don't tell me how great your team is, right? Really tell me how you're going to solve the problem, how you're different, how you're going to help me reduce my capex or my opex, or how am I going to make my technicians more efficient." Right? Really get down to the core, and so we can start with the vendors on the other side of this platform and help them make make their value proposition more clear and concise because this market is just so overwhelming. And you take a category like security, I mean, again, to the average MSP, good luck, right? I mean, you think about,
Yeah.
get off my horse in a minute, but you think about going back to the days of antivirus, and then SIM comes on, and then you got this kind of next gen SIM, and then you got EDR comes on, and then you got XDR, and then MDR, or MDR and XDR, and then SOAR. And so and the overlap up and down, that's just that segment of security is insane, right?
It's
I think,
exhausting. Yeah.
yeah, so if we can bring a little bit greater level of transparency, organization, and help MSPs make better decisions, help vendors put a better foot forward, then that's really the goal of this platform at this point.
I love that. So
It
you
was a
kind of
long
made an
answer, sorry.
even no, it's okay. That's what this is for. And it sounds
Yeah.
like you made sort of an even playing field to start, which is extremely helpful given the industry. And I talk about that a lot too, coming from the enterprise world, as you've known, coming from enterprise and then comparing it to the MSP space, there isn't that versatility. It's not universally the same playing field. Um, there's a lot of money in cyber, and so it feels like people get sidelined a lot more. And it's more difficult to sell than cyber to the average mom and pop shop, or let alone to an MSP who has to make a choice. And then you throw in buzzword bingo of every year there's something new coming out, but then we have no definitions for what is considered between EDR and MDR and XDR and SOAR and MXDR, and what is defined, like what does that actually do and what does that mean. And so I like that you're kind of building that visualization, or you're providing contextualization a little bit more to MSPs, because that can create a lot of indecisiveness. And then also, it feels like we're in this time where you're comparing a bottle that's a multivitamin in some cases, I'm sure, with your vendors. Like you said, like what are they actually selling? Becoming a little bit murky in the water. So, like, do I want to buy this multivitamin, or do I want to buy this that has zinc in it, or do I want to just buy zinc?
Right.
And knowing the efficacy of it, I imagine also gets a little bit more blurry. How do you guys ensure when you are bringing on new vendors and new products, how do you really figure out, is this a multivitamin, or is this actually going to be a supplement that is helpful and direct?
Yeah, that great question. So with every vendor that we work with, right, there is that understanding where you belong, right? And we talked about the new buzzwords, right? Um, Almost everybody today wants their own unique AI category, right? But then when you break it down, you're like, well, all right, you are XDR, right? Or you are a SOAR that has AI capabilities or what have you. So that's always an interesting exercise as we're working with these organizations. And I got to be honest. I mean, I've been in this space for again a long time. Um, I get stumped every once in a while. I'm like, sometimes it's like you almost have to play Cluzo and ask like the most
Yeah.
obvious questions 4 or 5 times for them to get them to say, all right, well, yeah, we are really,
I was going to
for
ask,
the
have you played Stump the Chump with with vendors before, where they come in and you have to ask them the same question over and over again until they're like, "Okay, yes, I am the problem. This is what we do." To sort
yeah,
of
and,
filter out all
and
the marketing jargon that tends to go into this.
well, especially in the quote unquote sock space, um, I spent time a couple of years ago looking at kind of the traditional sock vendors, the ones that led their foot forward saying, I am a sock, I am a sock.
Mhm.
and we have this unique approach, and you cut through it, and 80% we're using Fortisim, building additional reporting or alerting on top of that, or trying to quell it. And yeah, so I spent a lot of time with a lot of companies in this space, just to find out that they're all doing the same thing. And so yeah, so David, I've seen that kind of story over and over and over. So but yeah, you have to kind of you know ask those basic questions multiple times. Often you get multiple answers. But here's what's really interesting, right? A couple of weeks ago, so one of the things we do with channel program is every week we put out I think every Saturday we put out a stack visualization. We'll take a different product category and we'll say, all right, here are the based on the product reviews that we have on the platform, here are the
Mhm.
quote unquote market leaders. And so we put data out based on the product reviews, but then as I mentioned, we've had 22,000 products added to the stacks, and so we can actually see how the MSP thinks about the technology. So we started when we started launch with Navistack. We said, all right, if you are a EDR, then you go in the EDR category, and the MSP can only put you in the EDR category. But then we had MSPs, calling us and say, well, I want to put this in my SOC because we use it part of our internal SOC.
Huh.
And so we actually opened up the platform for the MSP to self-identify or identify how they use the technology. And so you see, really interesting and creative ways that the MSPs actually categorize the technologies that they use. So you could take a category like SOC, and inside a SOC, you could have all of the layered applications up and down the stack inside a SOC, or you could have just a pure SOC as a service provider in SOC. So a lot of times we're dissecting that data really to try to figure out
Interesting.
how the MSPs are thinking about it, and then taking some of that data back to the vendors and saying, all right, well, this is why you might not be getting market traction, because the market thinks that you're this, or they're using you in this capacity. So you might need to clean up your messaging a little bit. And so that's been really fun exercise to go through some of these vendors over the last couple of months. Is seeing how the MSPs using their technology, but then going back to their site and seeing how they're actually talking about themselves.
Mhm.
Oftentimes they're like worlds apart. And so it gets into this again. This is a fast moving marketplace. It's complex. It's dynamic. And again, the market's maturing. The MSPs are maturing, but you still have just a wild, I mean, that spectrum of maturity from a security standpoint is, I mean, it's broader than it's ever been. So
Yeah.
it's, but it's data is really interesting when you start to peel into it.
So relating to some of the things that you see, right? You're obviously seeing a wide spectrum of maturity as it relates to MSPs, a significant safari playground of categories, and then of course the creative uses or uses or definitions of those categories now that we're seeing the introduction of security as a category in itself. A lot of what I've been having on these one-on-one conversations over the past year have been around, bloated technology stacks, a lot of redundancy in technologies, vendor relationships impacting the technology taken out of it completely and coming down to vendor relationships,
Yeah.
contractual service level agreement obligations and concerns, and then of course the checkbox mentality depending on the industry that they predominantly serve. Perhaps it's healthcare, education. Where do you see, especially in the data, because you guys have this pulse, or able to take this pulse on the market, where do you see the primary pain points sit for an MSP as it relates to them choosing their technology stack? And maybe you can start with defining what a technology stack is, especially for an MSP, and where what the biggest struggle is, what those pain points look like when it comes to choosing what that stack looks like.
Yeah, another great question. So let's go back to this the MSP marketplace and how the MSPs have been conditioned over the last, call it, 15 years, since they really started embracing these recurring revenue models, right?
Hmm.
MSPs would go out to these industry events, could be kind of the smaller boot camp style, or they get some of the larger trade shows, and they were conditioned to buy point products, right? Um, you think about the average kind of break fix MSP that's just getting started. They get one, two, three clients. They say, all right, well, now we need a security awareness training tool, or
Mm,
we need our first RMM and PSA to manage multiple customers effectively. So MSPs have been conditioned, and as is most organizations, but they've been conditioned over the years to buy point product, right? So they go out and buy their antivirus, and then they buy email security, and then they buy dark web monitoring, and at some point, after 3, 4, 5 years of going to these shows, they again start on their spreadsheet, and like they say, "Damn, I now have 29 different technologies." And as the market has matured, or have evolved, some of these technology vendors have gone to becoming multiple product vendors, right?
yeah.
Blackpoint is obviously a great example of that, right? Where they're now layering in different capabilities, acquiring solutions, building solutions to make a more of a holistic security platform. So, so what has happened, right? Again, because a lot of this is muddy. There's a lot of overlap again, particularly on the security side of it, that the MSPs are looking at their stacks and they're saying, again, we have so many solutions. And one of the challenges that, on the side of this is that these vendors are moving fast, they're iterating fast, they're scaling fast. Uh, that often leads to friction, relating back to your customer. So, it's about scale, it's about ARR, it's about MRR, and growth and growth and growth. But if the vendor's not taking time to really enable their partners and build that relationship, it's ultimately it becomes noise in and noise out, because that MSP's again working with, I think in our data set now, I think the average MSP's got something like 27 different products. um,
Right.
so it just, the market is just is it's as it's progressed, it's built even more and more friction. So I think that's where there's a really interesting opportunity for some of these platform plays to help these MSPs. And one things we've done is help them to visualize it. But then, as these platforms mature and they layer in different products, they can go back to the MSPs and say, well, this is how we can enable you better. This is how we can help you become more profitable, more efficient, because we've got multiple products integrated effectively, and we can better support you. But I think really we're at this point now in this marketplace where you know the vendors, whether they're a single product or they're a multiple product, they're a platform, they have to embrace enablement. Enablement in the past has often been seen kind of as an expense. It's always it's seen an expense until their churn numbers start to go up, and then they start to panic, and then we've got to go back and do a better job of enabling, and shoring up our partnerships. And so I think that's kind of where we are with this marketplace. Like you still have this kind of single point product mentality. You have multiple entrants in certain categories. You have in some categories you've got 40, 50, 60 different options to choose from. And I think what's going to separate the wheat from the chaff is, from a vendor standpoint, are the ones that you really lead into supporting the MSPs. And when you do that, then you avoid having your name thrown out all over Reddit and all these fun
Yeah.
boards
Oh
that
my
are out
gosh.
there. So yeah,
It is a spicy community for sure. I've noticed on the MSP Reddit side.
it is.
You a little bit too, that makes sense on the vendor relationships. And do you think that when an MSP is trying to make a decision and they've got 20 options in front of them and it becomes overwhelming, that they just choose something based on feasibility for pricing and packaging, and then they get pissed off later on because they've realized they signed up for a contract or something that's absolutely ridiculous, and then the efficacy of the product or the service in itself, that vendor relationship goes to essentially. Do you see that that's starting to I feel like that's something I've had conversations on, but I didn't know how common it was of what we're seeing today is we're overwhelmed, so we just pick one, like it's The Bachelor, and we're just picking one and going with it. And then we realize like, "Oh my god, this was a really bad choice. This is not going to last
Yeah,
more than a month, but I've signed up for 3 years
yeah.
contractually."
Yeah, look, that happens increasingly. Again, because technology is evolving so fast, and it's always, particularly with security, right? It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And so that that the MSPs are susceptible to that, right? And it is what it is. So I think it's as much on the MSP as it is the vendor. I mean, MSP, especially now, set aside the fact that our platform's got thousands of product reviews, and right, and we've categorized things and try to make things easier. The
Right.
MSPs need to be doing their due diligence, right? I mean, it's you know it's no different than in the consumer world, right? When you're buying a vehicle, I forget the exact statistic, but it's like 80% of the buying process occurs online. I mean, the individual's researching, and they kind of know what they want going into it, and then hopefully at that point it's just it's a relatively smooth buying experience. I think the MSPs need to do the same thing with these technologies, and I will say though the challenge is that in a lot of cases it's square peg round hole. Not every vendor is the same. Get into the kind of the marketing spin. Do they really do what they say they do they
Right.
offer a trial, and it's in bandwidth, so it's always going to be a challenge. But I think it is, as much as an MSP due diligence, taking their time and understanding the technologies that they're working with, versus just jumping in and then signing up for something that they may not use or they're unhappy with, and so I don't know, that's maybe
Right.
just basic buying behavior, but both
No, that
sides
makes
have to
sense,
really lean
especially
in
on
and make it easy.
the car purchase side. That totally makes sense. You spend a lot more
Mm,
time doing independent research in those real life situations. So why wouldn't you when it comes to your business, of course? And I think,
yeah.
you talked about enablement a lot, and I think the core component of enablement is teaching our partners to ask the right questions on these disparate technologies. Like, what are the real questions you need to ask so that you don't get caught in some sort of logic loop that is not actually telling you if this is going to be the right product for you? And so we're going to focus on culturally what people are saying, and the vendor relationship that we've established or haven't established, or it's going to come down to what's cheapest. And then,
Mhm.
like you said, we're going to end up purchasing maybe not a lemon, but we're going to get something that's going to have 10 recalls in a year as a vehicle versus something that's going to be long term, like a Toyota Corolla that still you can hand down to four of your children.
Yeah.
They tend to be handed down a lot easier.
Right. Well, look, not to be a plug for channel program, but that's one of the reasons why when we went down the path of adding product reviews to the platform, we said, look, this can't be like Reddit, right? You can't create a fake avatar and just put, and just vent about a vendor, right?
Right.
That's what Reddit's for, and what it, have at it, fire away. So with the product views, you have to be a real, real person, and it can't be just a hit piece, right? Sure,
Yeah.
there's a time and a place for that, and when we have a product review submitted, we look at it, we approve it, and then the vendor gets notice, say, hey, you had a product review, and they can say, yeah, this is a customer or this is not a customer. So there's kind of that, it's not a check and balance, but it's a way to kind of ensure the quality. And it doesn't matter if it's a 2 star or a 5 star or 1 star review, we're going to publish it. Um,
Right.
because the idea is that the MSP is not hiding. They can't hide and create these
Hmm.
these kind of fake reviews, if you will, like they do out on Reddit. So I don't know. I think there's no excuse not to use a platform like ours as you're looking at these technologies and as part of your buying criteria or decision. So it's hard, right? Because it's always the market's moving fast. You want to keep up with the MSP down the street. You get when they're
Hmm.
using this particular vendor, and so oftentimes it's a very hasty decision or whatever. But yeah, this is this is a marketplace where both sides have to lean in and do
Right.
right by each other. You can't just because you signed up for a 3-year deal, you can't just go out there and complain about it, right? It might be
Well,
very valid reasons to do it. Yeah,
especially when it comes to cybersecurity. We want,
sure.
I think, our vendors to evolve in a positive direction. So if
Yeah.
they're failing and we have, you know, uncut, real, not anonymized reviews, product reviews on what's working, what's not, then vendors can evolve. And we're going
Right.
to continue this, I don't know, disservice to the whole purpose of cybersecurity and making it more accessible, defeating that sidelining concept from the commercial cyber side to the mom and pop shop. So we're doing a disservice to our downstream clients and customers if we're sitting there and making, lackluster decisions or decisions that aren't, or even on the vendor side that aren't enabling the MSP, and then vice versa. We need MSPs to enable the vendors to be better and make sure that we are evolving in a positive direction.
Look,
Um,
this is the team sport, and I'd say real quick. I mean, one of the
I like
things
that.
I've always, yeah, look, I've always admired about John, your CEO, is that he's leaned in to that concept, right? He's been very public, very accessible to the industry, been very educational over the years. So I think, maybe that's a tip to every vendor, right? It's you might not have to have the outgoing personality like John or what have you, but I think the ones that really embrace this team sport mentality and connect with the
Hmm.
customers, those are vendors that end up scaling to have higher CSATs, and churns lower, and could be even in an inferior product. But if the MSP feels like there's engagement and there's support, particularly at the C level,
Yeah.
then in my opinion, those are the ones that really excel in this marketplace.
Yep. Yep. A good feedback loop for sure to
Yeah,
actually listen to the community.
how about
Okay.
that?
So this obviously, I like to talk about cybersecurity. That's what I
Mhm.
enjoy. It's what
Yeah.
I get paid to do. So cybersecurity isn't really cheap, and from what I've seen in the space specifically, again, there's a huge disconnect or divide between selling cyber and then checking a box or making decisions with that checkbox mentality. So when it comes to cybersecurity in the technology stack, where do MSPs need to focus? So based on the threat landscape, realistic needs, because that's where we're at, excuse me, business email
Mhm.
compromise, phishing, like this is still ransomware. These threats haven't gone away. They're still very real and probably more predominantly seen, anyways. And through the investment in satisfying security controls versus ensuring we are meeting or reducing that attack surface and meeting where the threats lie, where do you see MSPs need to focus on their cybersecurity investment? Or I guess what is your guys' data showing as it relates to MSPs investment in cyber?
Yeah. So another great question. So as mentioned, I think there still is that kind of point product mentality. But what's great about it is if you look at the overall expenditure, MSP's expenditure on their technology stack, security is now, it's like 38% of their overall expenditure. And that goes across all of the tools that an MSP will use. Again, whether it's service delivery or it's internal management of the MSP, right? So I think where this is going is, as this marketplace is maturing. Well, let me provide a little bit more context, especially as it relates to today. So what we saw over the last 3 years, call it, since global global challenges, you've seen this crazy explosion of, of devices, right? Especially devices outside of the traditional network. There's this absolute explosion of endpoints. So
Mhm.
I think one of the things that's interesting in this data is the real sharp focus on endpoint and on solutions like EDR, um, because it's now so pervasive, and it's fundamental to any MSP's practice now. It's not just, hey, I'm going in to install on-prem firewall. Like, everybody is distributed. So
Mhm.
so I think what's great is that the MSPs are embracing it. They understand that that's the future. They also understand that the traditional in the primary threat vectors of the individual, the email security, and then in layering in tools like security awareness training is it's not gonna go away. It's gonna accelerate, for better or worse. You'd hope that humans would evolve, but the data
No.
suggests that they're not evolving at the rate we'd like to see them evolve. But So I think in general, there's still going to be this mindset at the emerging end of the marketplace of, I got to buy this to solve this specific problem. But the good news is that the market's maturing. And as the market's maturing, vendors like Blackpoint are maturing, right? And they're layering in multiple products. And I think the platforms that layer in the multiple products that can help create very consistent and digestible messaging around each one of the products, I think that's going to be extremely beneficial to the MSPs because that the premise is that if you start with one product with the vendor and then you layer in a second and third and fourth, ultimately your stack cost is reduced because you're not,
Right.
you should get
You're
economies, right?
offsetting.
You're
Yeah.
offsetting it. And so I think that will be a huge message moving forward, right? Because again, what I is looking forward and what I, might be slightly concerned with is that, yeah, there was a massive explosion of endpoints and massive explosion of technologies, but that explosion of endpoints is normalizing. And I hate to
Mhm.
say is it five letters? I hate to say the COVID word, but that COVID bounce is like normalizing at this point.
Right.
And I think it's going to force, there's still going to be growth. And there's still going to be MSPs that are going from, all right, I'm working with a small business now, I'm going into hybrid IT and moving up to mid market and enterprise. But I think there's going to be downward pressure on the MSPs to really get their costs, their stack costs in line. And I think that's where they should be looking at the platforms. And again, they could do their due diligence, and it's not like you're going to swap out a very capable product for something that's like it's
Yeah.
checking the box. So I think that mentality has to kind of you have to be
But you're
do
looking
away with that
for maybe
mentality.
the multivitamin at that point too. You're looking
Yeah,
for more solutions in one, and hoping the efficacy actually is there with those two. So
yeah.
categorically, because you guys do have a unique view on the data, I mean, you have real data. So categorically, where do you see trends for MSPs? Like, what are the security based technologies that are at the top of the list that they're investing in?
Yeah, mention, right? I mean, it's called what 10 years now since we've been talking about business email security and business email
Yeah.
compromise. Those numbers are trending as you would expect, just because that threat vector is moving pretty steadily up and to the right. So you're seeing email security, you're seeing security awareness training, anti phishing technologies still toward the top. You're seeing you can look at kind of the dark web tools now, whether they're an assessment tool or they're using in
Hmm.
practice as an alerting tool. You're seeing those, and again, those are more kind of individualized, products. Some are being now integrated into platforms, but I think where you're seeing mass acceleration, finally, is in MDR. Right, you're seeing it
Hmm.
in EDR. Well, you're seeing it more so in EDR, but you're starting to see MDR pick it up. And honestly, it's a testament to some of the folks like John who had the ability to educate the market over the last 5 6 years. Right? I mean, you brought up EDR 5 years ago, 4 years ago, and you get blank stares back from MSPs. Now they
Right.
understand it, and they understand again because of this disparate nature of the marketplace. They're understanding why they have to start with EDR, and
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's it's surpassed Seam significantly. It's even passed kind of basic antivirus firewall applications, and EDR in that space is even moving faster than the uptake of the traditional RMM, which has been table stakes for an MSP. So I think I think
Right.
this marketplace is going to, as much as individual, the single product oriented companies don't want to hear it, but I think the marketplace is moving toward more platform oriented, and I think EDR combined with MDR, and then if you want to put it in a separate category, kind of this outsourced SOC. Those are the areas that are starting to really see acceleration in terms of products added to stacks within Navistack, and then certainly we see that with
Hmm.
number of product reviews on the platform. So we've got two different data sets to look at that and rationalize or normalize those numbers, and that's where we're seeing the trends.
Right. And I think that was the biggest thing too, working primarily with enterprise level and Fortune 100 and 500 and moving into the MSP space. that we're still working on the adoption of EDR in general,
Hmm.
and
Right.
that it's increased. And then you see these other technologies becoming more legacy, and then you see technologies that where we're trying to make sure that we're educating the space and saying, yes, we understand in many cases, especially regulatory wise, you need to have a seam. But when you look at the reality of how security operations work and how detection and incident response work, the seam is probably the last place in the nowadays that we're really going to leverage compared to the usefulness that an EDR has. And
Yeah.
also like what you're saying too, which I think is an interesting, we're trying to track it a lot. And, I've been out there talking about EDR evasion and bypass techniques. So in no way am I trying to preface, don't invest in EDR, but also
Mhm.
I'm interested to see this continued evolution of where RMMs are going to live for
Yeah.
MSPs. Not just not talking on any RMMs or any of the vendors, and they will exist for a while, and they exist at the enterprise space, whether those enterprise realize it or not. But
Hmm.
I want to see like where do these technologies start to marry each other in
Yeah.
their capabilities, and how can we stop focusing on technologies, and I know regulatory wise and regulations aren't going to keep up with us, but how do we focus on those technologies, that marriage, so it's actually making a difference when it comes to identification, detection, and response? Because again, those NIST pillars that you're talking about, like that's what we need. We need the technologies that serve those capabilities that have to be held in house in order for us to defend against threats. And um, making sure that the technologies we invest in aren't also the risky ones that help enable the threats to go further, which is the RMM debate right now, too. And so, how do we evolve there? So, I like to. Is that something that at the channel program too? Are these trends that you try to track, and then messaging wise, you really want if you could give that advice back to the MSP space, what would that advice look like?
Yeah. So to your question, yeah, we absolutely track this. Um, the advice back to the MSPs is, you know, a couple of things. One, it's you have to leverage the market, and by that I mean you have to participate in some of these events. You can't. It's still surprising to me the percentage of MSPs. I think it's something like 70%, 72% of MSPs go to one event or less per year, right? So a lot of them are learning online and what have you, but they're not getting out and really engaging with the vendors or engaging with the thought leadership or being educated like they should be. So whether it's going to an event like Write a Boom, right, which is it's been an amazing event that's evolved over the last short 2 years, 3 years. So I think MSPs got to really, because now it's I think everybody's thinking security first. They really have to lean into and get educated. Now, I will say again on the other side of the market, the other side of the coin, that the vendors that can take something like Seam, XDR, MDR, SOAR, and visualize it and make it make sense for the MSPs, right? I think that's the big challenge, right? Particularly in this kind of this slice or this segment of this marketplace. The vendors that can
Yeah.
lean in and visually help the MSPs understand, what this kind of new stack looks like. Those are the ones that are, I think, they're going to succeed. Those are the ones that the MSPs are going to gravitate towards. So as much as it requires MSPs to up their game and what have you, it takes equal, if not greater, investment on the vendor side to cut through the BS and not just talk about the buzzwords, but like really
Yeah.
educate the channel, right? Because to your point, everybody's throwing in AI, right? And at the end of the day, like, what does it really mean within some of these products, right? I mean, is
Mm.
it is it efficiency? Is it data structure? Is it integrity? I mean, what does it really mean? So, I don't know. I can go on and on about this, but I really think this is where the vendors, and again, credit back to John with early days of making security, making this concept of complex security, that much better understood. And so
Yeah.
because it's accelerating. I think the vendors just they have to stop and almost paint by numbers. Unfortunately, if you want scale in this marketplace, yeah, you go after the top 15% that really get it. But if you want scale, it's that other 85% of the marketplace that you really have to do your job of educating and maturing. And so um, I throw as much back on the vendors as I would on the MSPs at this point.
I like that. And I think that's how it should be, to be honest. The biggest takeaway from this conversation is going back to enabling. I do think it's a two-way street. Like, I think it's a relationship. I think in order for the vendors to be able to enable the partners and the MSPs to be able to enable the vendors, we need to be asking the right questions.
Yeah,
And we need to stop looking at security. We need to not make security more complex than it already is and muddy the waters with the marketing and the buzzwords and the things that don't enable the MSPs to, again, ask those right question of those vendors.
yeah,
And vendors, I don't think we're going to evolve until we start having those hard conversations. And it is having what you guys are providing is, again, that product feedback. I think that's really important. I think, you know, what I'm seeing a lot on Reddit, what I'm seeing a lot on Discord and stuff, we need to start shifting the way we have our conversations. And it
yeah,
needs to be agnostic, a little bit vendor agnostic in a sense, but also the vendors need to step up and say, okay, I hear you, I listen to you, we need to change the way we do things. So Kevin, thank you so much for being on. This was really this was a very interesting topic. I hope everyone at least took some notes on what the hell a technology stack is, especially MSPs, where we need to focus, and how we need to start asking those right questions. So I'm sure people are going to start approaching you, and you had some fantastic viewpoints, and I really appreciate you for joining us today.
yeah.
And then maybe next time we can even get even more spicier. But I appreciate what the channel program's doing, and yeah, especially if you can shed some light on the cybersecurity industry a little bit more down the road. I think that's what we need. We need more of these conversations. It doesn't need to
Amen.
be so complex out there. There's especially experts like you. So thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. All right, everyone. We will catch you on the next episode of Return of the Mac. Thank you.